officer, my wife is hemorrhaging. She's 33 weeks. I'm a paramedic. Hardrove is 4 minutes from here.
I'll decide when we're done here. Step back.
My wife, please.
I said step back. I won't.
The night Brennan carried his wife to the car, he was not thinking about statistics. He was thinking about her breathing. Bry had woken him just after 11:30, and the sound she made was not the sound of discomfort or false alarm. In 9 years of emergency medicine, Brennan Ashford had learned that pain has a vocabulary of its own. What he heard from his wife in those first seconds told him everything he needed to know and left no room for hesitation. He was a paramedic with Memphis Fire Department, stationed off Lamar Avenue in one of the busiest response corridors in Shelby County. He had worked summers without air conditioning, talked strangers through overdoses in parking lots, held wounds closed with his hands while the ambulance moved through red lights at 2 in the morning. He knew what a medical emergency looked like. He knew what it felt like in his chest when the clock started running. Bry was 33 weeks pregnant. Her OB had flagged elevated risk markers at her last visit and had made her promise, in the specific way doctors make promises feel like contracts, that if anything changed, anything at all, she would not wait. Brennan did not wait. He calculated the transport time before he had fully finished dressing. Calling 911 would mean waiting for a unit to reach Snowden Avenue, then loading her, then driving. 12 minutes minimum, probably 15. Harrove Medical Center was 4.2 miles from their front door. He could have her in the emergency bay in under 7 minutes if he left now. He had his phone connected to the Harrove ER line before he reached the boulevard, telling the triage nurse exactly what he suspected, using the clinical language because the clinical language was precise and precision, was the only thing that mattered at 11:31 in the morning on the worst night of his life. He was doing 67 in a 45 when the lights appeared behind him. He pulled over immediately, hazards on, window down, hands on the wheel before the officer had finished parking. He had already decided that the next 60 seconds would determine everything, and that how those seconds went depended almost entirely on him staying calm. The officer who walked up to his window moved without urgency. He swept his flashlight across the interior of the car, across Bry Allen with her hand pressed to her abdomen and her face tight against the pane, and his pace did not change. Brennan spoke first. He explained everything: his wife, the pregnancy, the suspected abruption, his credentials, the hospital 4 minutes away. He used exact language. He made no demands. He asked clearly and directly to be allowed to go or to be escorted. The officer asked for his license and registration. Brennan reached for the glove box with a steady hand that cost him more than he would ever be able to explain. He handed the documents through the window and tried again. "Every minute here," he said, "is a minute she does not have. I am telling you clinically, not emotionally, that we are running out of time." The officer told him to step out of the vehicle. There is a particular kind of stillness that comes over a person when they understand that reason has stopped working. Brennan had seen it in patients who had accepted something terrible. He felt it move through him now, cold and clarifying. He stepped out of the car the way he had been trained to handle situations that were deteriorating, deliberately, visibly, with every movement controlled. He left the door open behind him so he could still see her. He was directed to the rear of the vehicle, away from the passenger window, away from her line of sight. He stood there with his hands at his sides and the orange hazard light blinking across his face, and he listened. He listened to Bry's breathing change. He listened to the rhythm of it, the way she was working to manage each wave of pain, the way that management was beginning to slip. He had listened to patients cross that line before, in the back of ambulances, in emergency bays, in places where there were hands and equipment ready to catch them. He did not want to listen to his wife cross it on the shoulder of Elvis Presley Boulevard. The officer ran his plates. He took his time. He returned with more questions. He asked where Brennan was coming from. He asked why he hadn't called an ambulance. Brennan answered each question the same way, steadily, without flinching, without raising his voice, with the specific patience of a man who understood that panic would not help his wife and might cost her the last margin they had. Then the officer asked if he had been drinking. Brennan looked at him. He said no, once, didn't add anything to it. The field sobriety check that followed lasted several minutes. Brennan stood at the rear of his car and followed a flashlight with his eyes while his wife's sounds changed behind him. When she cried out, sharp and involuntary, cutting through the August heat in a way that could not be misread, his body moved toward her before his mind had caught up. He took one step. The officer's voice came down hard. "Stay where you are." Brennan stopped. He turned back around. His hands were shaking, not from fear but from the effort of standing still when every instinct and every year of training was telling him to move. "She is bleeding," he said. His voice was quiet, each word placed down carefully. "She is 33 weeks pregnant and she is bleeding, and I am a paramedic, and I am telling you that if we do not get to that hospital in the next few minutes, there is a very real chance I lose them both. I am begging you, please." The officer looked at him, then toward the passenger window, then back at Brennan. He told him he was almost done. He walked back to his cruiser. Brennan stood at the back of his car and did the only thing left available to him. He counted. He counted the seconds the way he counted them in ambulances, over patients who were running out of time. It was the only way he knew to hold himself together. 22 minutes after the stop began, he was handed his license back and told he was free to go. He covered the 4.2 miles in 4 minutes. The team at Harrow was waiting at the bay doors, but something in the way they moved when they saw Bry told him that the 22 minutes had already spoken for themselves. There is a specific quality to the speed of medical professionals working against the back end of time, and Brennan recognized it because he had moved that way himself, in other bays, for other families who were standing exactly where he was standing now. He held her hand through the corridor until the double doors closed between them. He sat down in a plastic chair against the wall and pressed his hands over his face. The doctor came out just after 1:00 in the morning. She did not soften her posture. She did not lean forward in the way people lean when what they are about to say can be survived easily. She told him that Bry had experienced a complete placental abruption. She told him the blood loss had been severe by the time they arrived. She told him the team had done everything available to them. Then she told him that Bry did not survive, that the baby did not survive. The story moved through Memphis the way truth moves through communities that are already wound tight around grief, not through press releases, through a nurse who couldn't sleep, through a name passed from one phone to the next until it reached the people who had sat across from Bry Allen in meetings about maternal health and had heard her say more than once that black women in this country were dying because the system moved too slowly when it came to them. The system had moved too slowly for her. The dash cam footage was released 4 days later under public and political pressure. It ran for 22 minutes and 40 seconds. It showed a man standing at the rear of his vehicle, hands visible, voice steady, explaining with clinical precision what was happening in the front seat of his car. It showed a field sobriety test administered while a pregnant woman's cries came through clearly on the audio. It showed the exact moment, time-stamped, when those cries changed pitch. And then, several minutes later, when they became something quieter and more frightening than crying. The footage did not require interpretation. It simply showed what 22 minutes looked like when someone decided that procedure was more important than what was happening right in front of him. The officer was terminated 5 weeks after the incident. There were no criminal charges. The district attorney's office reviewed the case and declined to prosecute, citing insufficient evidence that the conduct met the legal threshold for criminal negligence under state statute. The announcement came on a Thursday afternoon in 2 paragraphs. A councilwoman who had been among the loudest voices demanding the footage stood at a microphone that same evening without prepared remarks. She said that a man had been fired and that two people were still dead, and that those two facts existing simultaneously should tell everyone in that city something important about the distance between accountability and justice. Brennan Ashford returned to work 6 weeks after August 19th. His colleagues did not gather around him or make speeches. They gave him the thing that people who work emergencies understand is the most valuable thing you can offer someone who has survived something unsurvivable. They let him be useful again. They put him back on the truck and they ran calls, and they let the work hold him the way the work had always held him. He kept her name badge on the dashboard. He never took it down.